I saw a post this week on Facebook, which I found deeply, deeply troubling. And I know that doesn't seem so hard to do these days. There is much on social media that is troubling. But this one really stayed with me these past few days. Somebody I know posted about a family trip that they took to the park. And again, you're thinking, what could be so upsetting about that? With pages online devoted to racism, Holocaust denial, a host of other disgusting and dangerous ideas, why was a post about someone's family trip to the park so upsetting to me? I want to tell you a little bit more about the post. It begins by explaining how careful they were as a family to maintain their distance from others, how they've been taking extra precautions due to the rising number of COVID cases in the area, and they simply want to enjoy some time as a family, unmasked, safe in the outdoors. How frustrated they feel that others are not being as mindful. And I imagine this post doesn't really sound so bad. But what comes next was the moral outrage that they expressed. How runners and cyclists zipped past us with little regard for our health and safety. How an unmasked couple, emphasis on unmasked, approached us to make small talk. Before you want to put this elderly couple on trial, you should know they also committed the great sin of offering to take a photo of the family so they could all be in one frame. The post goes on for several more paragraphs, drowning in a sea of moral outrage and righteous anger. Everybody else was the bad guy. People weren't just accidentally careless, but wicked, out to get them. They weren't people who made mistakes, but personified evil. The truth is that this post isn't so bad, but my issue is that it's emblematic of a larger trend in our society. A trend to express moral outrage when there really isn't any reason for it. Cyclists shared not just the path, but the author's desire to spend some time outdoors. The elderly couple didn't walk up to the family with bad intentions, but to connect. I imagine, like so many of us, they've spent far too much time disconnected from other human beings. And they were reaching out for a few moments to break their isolation. And yet, we've developed an incredible ability to express moral outrage. We're better, I think, than the ancient prophets of Israel. I want to pause for a moment and turn to our Parsha. Our tradition is clear. We have two brothers. Jacob is righteous. He represents all of the values that we hold dear, and Esav. Esav is a villain, a scoundrel, a lowlife. The rabbis teach in the Talmud that on a single day, Esav committed 5 different sins. He had intercourse with a married woman, he murdered, he blasphemed God, and if that wasn't enough, he denied the tenets of Judaism and then rejected his heritage entirely, they tell us. In another midrash, the rabbis teach that Esav practiced idolatry. And in another, that it was his evilness that actually caused his father Isaac's blindness. The enemies of Bnei Yisrael, the rabbis teach, from the Romans to the Amalekites, are his descendants. Our tradition is clear and unequivocal. Esav is the embodiment of evil itself. There could be nothing worse than him. The moral outrage our tradition expresses is clear. But we read this week in our Parsha how when his brother was starving, he said to him, "Sell me your birthright first. Only then will I give you some food." But wait, that wasn't Esav, that was Jacob. But we read this week how he deceived his father, how he stole his brother's blessing. But again, I apologize, that's not Esav, that was Jacob. What about later in the Torah, when Esau shows such favoritism to one of his sons that it almost leads to fratricide? Again, I apologize. I had it mixed up. It's Jacob, not Esau. When we look at the text, one could ask, why is it we think that Jacob is the good guy in all of this? Why is he not the villain? Why do the rabbis create all of these other stories to explain why Esau is so awful and Jacob is so righteous? The answer is simple. We see ourselves in him. Literally, he is our ancestor. He is one of the patriarchs of our people. And so for generations, we've expressed righteous indignation at Esau. The commentators have added narrative and narrative, explaining and justifying Jacob's actions. Esau was bad. He deserved what he got. What Jacob did was a means to an end, a necessary evil. But this narrative ignores an important fact. They both had good and bad qualities. Esau had both good and bad. That each of us have good and bad. It ignores the reality that life is much more complicated than simply black and white. The version of events that our tradition emphasizes commits the same wrong that the Facebook post I began with did. It commits the same error that is overtaking public discourse. We have to be 100% right, 100% good. And anybody who does anything we don't like, anybody who disagrees with us, they're not just wrong, they're immoral, they're evil, they're wicked. The expression of moral outrage in our world has become a disease. It's far too often not even about the issue, but more about the one that's expressing it. One psychological study done recently, it showed that expressing moral outrage about others reduces one's own feelings of guilt about things that they may have done. How often can we see examples of this? Someone standing up on a soapbox, raging against something that they themselves have done. Rather than looking inward and working to better oneself, it's far easier to put others down. Another study found that punishing someone we perceive as bad releases dopamine in our brains. Acts of public shaming offer us a chemical high. And like any drug, we chase more and more and more of that. And as a society, we've become addicted. Just look at what goes on in the world. Look at the conversations and op-ed pieces and papers in the media and online. Think about everyone who's critical of Israel. They can blame Israel for all sorts of human rights violations, but they can't see that in any of the Arab countries. In any other country in the world, they can't criticize in the same way they can express their moral outrage and indignation at Israel. Or speakers who've been canceled like Ayan Hirsi Ali. Figures who've been told that their ideas are Islamophobic, they're racist, and they're bigoted, forgetting the fact that she herself was a woman born in a Muslim community and a victim of the way the Islamic world treated her. She speaks out about the treatment of women in the Islamic world, yet she's been canceled because of moral indignation. Think of all the political figures who stand up to fight for any kind of racism or bigotry they see. But when a Jewish person says that they've done something that's offensive, they don't want to hear it. Their moral indignation only confirms their bias. It's not really about equality, about fighting hatred. Think about those who defend some politicians who've worn blackface, but not others. Who use it not for the issue that it is, but as a tool for political gain. Think of all those who are outraged and upset at football players kneeling during the national anthem. It's an ashanda. It's destroying the values that America stands for. But they stay silent when a politician attempts a coup. We are addicted to moral outrage, but it's not about the moral issue that's involved. It's about something else. It's about something in ourselves. It's about lifting ourselves up by putting others down. By expressing anger at anyone who even appears to transgress our values. And in chasing the high, we neglect the truth. We neglect the causes that so many pretend to care about. And we neglect reflecting on what it is in ourselves that we need to fix. In the Amidah, we refer to God as Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God. This text comes directly from Moses in the book of Devarim. But in the Talmud, the rabbis ask a question. They want to know how later prophets like Jeremiah or Daniel changed that wording. For example, Jeremiah leaves out Nara, awesome, in his description of God. And Daniel leaves out Gibor, mighty. The sages are shocked. How can they change the words that Moses established? How can they deviate from the words of the Torah? Rabbi Eliezer has an answer. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'amitihu, that the Holy Blessed One is truthful. Rabbi Eliezer says that they understood that more than anything else, God is truth. God is emet. God hates lies. And they lived in a time when Bnei Israel was being persecuted. Jeremiah didn't see God's awesomeness. Daniel didn't witness God's might. So they left them out. The ultimate value, Rabbi Eliezer says, is truth. God is a God of truth. Going back to that post, it's indicative of a problem we have in society. We express righteous anger just for the sake of it, not for the cause, not for the truth. And that's the problem. Because that false outrage, it neglects the facts. It ignores the truth. And it does nothing to fix the problems that it claims to. Jacob wasn't perfect. Neither was Esau. I'm not perfect. None of us are. And the truth is that the world right now is so divided. And if we have any chance of bridging those divides, of doing a tikkun, of repairing the damage, we have to be willing to admit the truth, to see nuance, to not just stand up for causes that benefit us, that promote us or our values or our people, but to stand up all around for truth. That's what I hope for this Shabbat. That more than any other words we pray, any other titles we give God, we remember that at the end of it all, Adonai Elohechem Emet. God, our God, is truth. Shabbat Shalom.